Well, thank you, Gloria. And I want to thank all of you of coming here today, because I don't get to talk to a crowd that's this big very often. As you can see, I teach at Williams College, and Williams really prides itself on teaching very small classes. And I tend to teach very, very small classes of about 10 to maybe 15 students. So it's really exciting to have so many people interested not only in the classics of Russian literature, which I've, as Gloria so nicely said, I've spoken before, but a topic that I research all the time. And I have been studying Vladimir Putin, and you'll see in what ways when I show you my slides, but I've been studying him now for about 10 years, because that phrase that Gloria used in introducing me, cult of personality, that was something that arose immediately after Putin came to power. And we'll go through a little bit of timeline so we can have some facts and figures. But that phrase, I should tell you, is really a red button issue for people who study Russia. Anyone who has ever looked at Russian and Soviet history knows that a cult of personality is a bad thing, and it's associated first and foremost with Stalin. Okay, not a good guy in history, as we know. He, when it comes to the mass murderers of the 20th century, he is arguably #1, even although maybe Hitler comes to mind more quickly. And so any comparison with that sort of makes people wonder what's going on. So that's how my interest in this topic started. And I thought it would be nice to hook in with some current news. Now, this is a piece that comes from Huffington Post. And, the print is very, very small. Some of you might be able to see it, some of you not. But you can see one of these classic images of Putin. This is not a contemporary image. It comes from 2007, a photo shoot organized by the Kremlin when Putin was on vacation, so that they could show the world how handsome and virile the Russian president is. However, this piece, if you can read the fine print, or if you heard this is basically a news blurb from Huffington Post that came out of the recent release, as of yesterday, of the new 4-part documentary by Oliver Stone that has interviews with Vladimir Putin. And one of the famous lines that came out of this interview is basically, Vladimir Putin doesn't have a bad day because he's not a woman. Now, you look at that title and you laugh and you think, clearly, how could this be serious? But believe it or not, this seemingly jokey line is a red thread that has woven through Putin's time in office. The idea that he is a real man, that he's a president who has photo shoots with him topless, with him fishing, with him playing hockey, and we're going to see some of those images. And basically, I brought this up because not only is it connected with this Oliver Stone documentary, which I personally am dying to see. I haven't even seen part 1 yet. I have to, I suppose, subscribe to Showtime, but maybe some of you do. But also the fact that this talks about Putin as a man, his masculinity, his manliness, his political cachet as a man, as being a defining feature of who he is. And it's as much in the news today as it was when he first came to power. Now, just to be clear, many of you, I'm sure, are avid consumers of the news. You read the New York Times, you go to your websites, you're, reading The Economist, what have you. This is Putin walking in the Kremlin through the beautiful halls of power. I am not a political scientist. So what I'm going to talk about today does not have to do with what it is that political scientists and historians typically do. They talk about political actors as rational figures making rational decisions. Okay, now, exactly. Okay, I'm with you all. I question the rationality of humanity as someone who studies Dostoevsky in general, but I'm less interested in that. The work I do, as Gloria described, has to do with performance. So as I talk today, my comments are more about how political power is being used as a vast media stage, not only in Russia today, but in the world. But I'm focusing primarily on Russia, how the Kremlin has become a stage, how Vladimir Putin has been cast in a certain role as a political actor, and not so much, what does this have to do with rational decision, policy, or global relations, what have you, but how this creates emotional ties for Russia's citizens, how this creates an effective universe in which stories about Putin, the myth of who he was as a child, you know, how he was formed, his education, how this has created the highest ratings for any world politician right now. Does anyone know what Putin's current approval ratings are in the Russian Federation? Anyone have an idea?
It's around 85%.
85, you win. Okay, I'm going to give out my first prize of the day. This is a Vladimir Putin, Dmitry Medvedev fridge magnet for you. Yes, okay? First prize of the evening, yes. Putin, as of February 2017, his approval rating was 86, 85 is pretty close, 86%. What are the approval ratings of people like Barack Obama when he was in office, or Donald Trump now that he's in office? Yeah, beneath 50. When American politicians get to 50%, they're having a good day, okay? Putin, for the entire time he's been in office, has had approval ratings far over 50%, and typically they are going from 70, 80, 85, things like this. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's clear that something is going on that is about emotion, that is about these affective attachments. It's about what people feel for Putin, regardless of what he might be doing in the domestic sphere, regardless of what he might be doing in international politics. So that's what it is I'm interested in. And, you know, Putin is someone who, you know, you can call him good, bad, you can call him ugly, but you have to call him an effective politician. This is where this notion of realpolitik comes in to the title of my talk, because I am looking at this myth of Putin, this performance of political masculinity by Putin as something that plays very, very well domestically. Not only that, but now that Putin is in his third term as president of the Russian Federation, is also playing internationally very, very well. So, interesting things to think about, okay? We have all kinds of state-generated propaganda that is pro-Putin, okay? And this is something that makes Putin's time not unlike the Soviet Union, not unlike the Stalin era. The Stalin era was well known for state-sponsored propaganda, and here is a large, beautiful, you know, poster that appeared in the late 2000s, and in Russian this says, "For our motherland, za rodinu, za suverenitet," for sovereignty. And some of you might know that the catchphrase for what it is they do in Russia is sovereign democracy. Sound like an oxymoron? It is, okay? Okay, for sovereignty, and za Putina, for Putin. So linking these three things together with a picture of his, you know, decisive yet kind face. Okay, however, in the Russian Federation today, you can also see images like this. Okay? And this is one, you know, if Putin is all about masculinity, what better way to say that you don't support him than to represent him in drag, represent him with the long eyelashes, the lipstick, the makeup. Not only that, but against a rainbow flag, which is the symbol of the international gay rights, the international LGBTQ movement. And also, you see that Sochi.ru 2014? The Olympics, okay? So in other words, a bloody cross through the Olympics. And this is an image that appeared in a parade that was trying to denounce the corruption that happened around the development of Sochi as a site for the Olympics. So this is something that you can see in Russia today. And as a matter of fact, there were protests over the weekend in which Alexei Navalny, the big opposition leader, was arrested. These people still can protest. And it's very important for us to keep in mind that this is a huge difference from the Soviet Union, a huge difference from the time of Stalin. Admittedly, the Putin regime has done a lot to clamp down on opposition. They did arrest Navalny. They have killed journalists. However, people still can protest, which is something that really didn't happen during the Stalin era. Okay, so we have to do a little bit of who is Putin, where is he from, okay? These are images of him as a very young boy in school. And, you know, he was born and raised in Leningrad, and him as a young KGB officer, okay? Now, his youth and his, well, actually, let's just go back for a second. I should tell you that when Putin was first brought to power in about the year 1999-2000, no one in Russia knew who he was. He was a totally blank slate. And one of the first things that happened with the people who are called political technologists, this is a name for basically image makers, spin makers in the Kremlin, one of the first things they did is publish a book called First Person. This was in 2000. It was a series of interviews, primarily with Putin, but also with his then wife Lyudmila and his former school teacher from Leningrad. And they put out basic information about Putin's life, when he was born, okay, where he lived, Leningrad. And what's interesting is that even this basically skeleton biography, even this already had the sniff of myth. It already smelled like some kind of mythic story. For example, being from Leningrad, some of you probably know that Leningrad was a key battleground in World War II. Subjected to a siege of about 900 days by the Nazis, the city was encircled. Well, Putin's parents were siege survivors. This makes them basically martyrs within the Soviet and Russian historical span. Not only that, but his grandfather, believe it or not, was a cook for Stalin. Yeah. And, you know, when you work around Stalin and you live to tell the tale, that is actually very significant, okay? And we're told throughout this story about these unusual ties, these historical pivotal elements about who he is, not to mention the hard work that goes into him, you know, whatever, getting into the university, getting into law school, becoming a KGB trainee as a young man. So even these early bits of information give us a kind of mythic Putin. Okay, now here are the basic dates of when he comes to power. So August 1999, Boris Yeltsin, who was a, we're all old enough, we remember him. Remember him? Appeared drunk in public, okay? Usually not recommended for heads of state, okay? He appointed Putin prime minister in 1999. And this was basically a time in which this completely unknown figure from local Petersburg politics was suddenly jettisoned to the heights of power. Okay, by December 1999, Yeltsin resigns and Putin becomes the acting president of the Russian Federation. They held elections the next year, and Putin is elected to his first term. And you'll notice 2 terms back-to-back of 4 years. Okay, and due to the Russian Constitution, you can only serve 2 terms in a row. However, you can go on to serve 2 more terms in a row. So basically in there, Medvedev, the other guy on the fridge magnet, he becomes president. We'll all remember that. And then by the time Putin, you know, he's prime minister, by the time he's elected in 2012, they've changed the Constitution to manufacture 6-year presidential terms. So I'd be willing to bet that when we get to, you know, the next election, which would be in 2018, we're going to have Putin once again, okay? And then who knows, maybe we'll do another switcheroo with someone. We'll see. However, this is someone who came from no place, and now basically he's there. He is entrenched. He's installed. Now, one of the reasons that, you know, Putin could get all of this popularity and have these high approval ratings is the fact that he was preceded by a bunch of leaders in Russia and the Soviet Union who were seen as old and as impotent. And this is, you know, one of these images of a matryoshka, one of these Russian nesting dolls. And we can see big Putin leader today, Yeltsin, Gorbachev, Brezhnev, and then down there, anyone know who that is? Khrushchev. Okay, you get the second fridge magnet. There you go. There you go. There's only one more prize. One more prize. Okay. So, and when we look at the official portraiture of some of these leaders, we can see what, you know, we can already see the remarkable difference between the images of Putin I've already shown you and these men. Brezhnev, who, you know, decorated general. However, he spoke Russian with a thick accent. And there's a host of jokes in Russian about stupid things that Brezhnev says. You know, this is someone who never was seen as fully literate, never seen as fully cultured, despite the fact that, you know, he had a family that spent millions and millions of rubles. It was rumored that his daughter, Alina Brezhneva, had stiletto heels that had diamonds at the points. Okay. Then we have Gorbachev. This is the immediate predecessor before the Soviet Union falls apart. Someone who's widely respected in the West. He's someone who's seen, I think particularly in North America, as having done some incredibly bold and daring things to move Russia towards democracy, taken big risks, and unfortunately in Russia, he's a laughingstock. Yeah, and that's largely because what comes after the fall of the Soviet Union, the 1990s, is economic chaos. And there are many people who made millions and millions of rubles, but the vast majority of the population was impoverished. And they blame this man for the demise of a country that at the very least gave them security. So these are seen as old men, as impotent men. And then worst of all, we have Yeltsin. And he's someone who had his own kind of mythic story of sacrificing himself for the Russian Federation. He had pretty bad cardiac problems. And, you know, the story was that he had basically given his heart to Russia. However, it's pretty clear that his long-term alcohol abuse probably compromised his health more than what he did for Russia. So he was seen as pretty much a joke by the time he hands over the presidency to Putin as well. So we have these older men who are seen as, you know, unattractive, who are seen as impotent politically and also physically. And then we end up with Putin all over the streets of Russia. Now, when we think about, you know, kind of constructing this cult of masculinity, this cult of Putin, we have to think of several things. And look here, just at the face, you know, the square jaw, the fact that he's firm, he's decisive, and some very important elements of this myth were constructed early on to be diametrically opposed to what it is that people understood about everyone, you know, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Gorbachev, Yeltsin, you name it. One of them was the fact that Putin is not a drinker. Now, doesn't sound that important. However, there has been a demographic crisis in the Russian Federation for now going on 30 years. And the one factor that the economists, the demographers, the historians latch on is alcohol abuse. The life expectancy of men fell beneath 60 years. In a developed country, that is abominable. And they didn't talk about women because it was so bad for men, but women were down to about 62 at one point in time, which is very, very low. So the fact that Putin was sober was incredibly important. Someone, no, seriously, someone who stood up for, you know, not abusing alcohol, was physically fit, and was a family man. Someone who loved his wife, cared for his children, took care of them. Now, what happened in all of this, you know, that's a poster outside. At the same time, in the early 2000s, when posters of Putin are beginning to go up outside, we're beginning to get posters of, you know, the president. This one we have Putin and Medvedev here in public offices. And this is a tradition that in Russian society goes way back to the pre-revolutionary era, having images of the Tsar or images of the head of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union. And this had not been the case with Yeltsin. They did not have pictures of him in political offices. But this is from the early 2000s. They're already there. Not only that, but they show up in people's homes. This is a photograph from Facebook of some guy who put his high school diplomas, the various things he won, and a picture of Putin on his wall. How many of you put pictures of Obama in your house? How many of you have a picture of Trump? Okay, you had, okay, got some Obama. Anyone picture of Trump? No, okay, okay. This is something we simply don't do. And we have to remember, in Russia, this is tied into the whole idea of iconography. This is a culture that comes out of Orthodox Christianity where images are sacred. And so putting an image of Putin in your room, even if it's next to your certificate for whatever, it sort of rings of the sacred. Okay? However, at the same time, in the 2000s, serious artists begin to make images of Putin. And this, I know, this is one that's particularly interesting when we think about the differences, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, with the cult of Stalin. When you look at this, it's hard to know, is it serious or is it a joke? Are we supposed to laugh at this? Or are we supposed to like it? And these are images from a calendar that was called The 12 Moods of Vladimir Putin. Okay? And the artist who made this is very well known. His name is Dmitry Medvedev, and he makes all other kinds of art that are sold in very nice galleries in Moscow and in Petersburg for large sums of money. But this is one where initially you think, oh, this could be serious, but by the time we get here, I don't know. It kind of looks like a monkey in the zoo. So it's something that it's kind of writing the fine line between serious and heavily ironic, and it's hard to know where we stand. Okay, this is another one by another very famous artist, and it's called Vladimir Putin and the Black Square. Does anybody know what the Black Square is? It's a very famous piece of modernist art by an artist, a Russian artist named Kazimir Malevich, and it was a black square in a frame. Okay, I know. It was a big deal in the early 20th century. But here, you know, to juxtapose this man who it looks like he's hectoring someone, he's sort of lecturing with this piece of modernist art, it's once again, what is this supposed to say? Is this supposed to be respectful? Or is this supposed to allow us to laugh at Putin? So at the same time that we're getting state-sponsored propaganda, which is 100% serious, we're getting this stuff that, you know, it's hard to know how we're supposed to take it. There's clearly the potential to read this ironically. We can laugh at this if we want to. Okay? We also have children who are drawing Putin. This comes from a contest in about 2004 in which children at school were asked to do their favorite portrait of Putin. And this is one that says Vladimir Vladimirovich, so that's his patronymic, is always on his steed. Okay? And it's by someone named Ksenia Bobrova, who's 10 years old from somewhere way in the provinces of Russia. And we can see her, a beautiful horse styled after My Little Pony, okay, with the orange mane. And Putin there in his judo outfit because he's a black belt in judo. Okay, here's another one that speaks very much to that element of him being a family man. We have a beautiful floral heart, which is around Putin with his wife, Lyudmila, and it says, Vladimir Vladimirovich and his wife are in love, okay? And down here, love with a little heart through it. So these were the images that children were encouraged to make in a school contest. You know, they're seeing images in their schools of Putin, and they're coming up with these all by themselves. Okay, so I've given you a sort of taste of what was out there in the 2000s. Now it's time to think about what the difference is between what's going on with Putin and what went on with Stalin. You probably all recognized him instantly. Okay, now one thing to keep in mind, the Soviet Union, particularly under Stalin, was an authoritarian regime. And there has been a tremendous amount of writing by historians, by economists, by political scientists about the top-down structure of Soviet society, of the Soviet economy in general. And that is true also of adulation of the great leader Stalin. Is that in order to express your love for Stalin, it had to be approved at the highest level and then it would trickle down. There was nothing bubbling up that didn't get checked by the higher up. So when we end up with things like this, for example, this is official portraiture. We know that this was made on command, that the artist might have had his or her own inspiration. However, it was approved of, it was controlled, it only made it into public because people deemed it acceptable. And here we see Stalin basically living out the myth of being the father of all the peoples of the Soviet Union. Everyone is a child, everyone sees him as a father. Okay? Here we have another one of Stalin. This is basically our beloved Stalin is the people's happiness. Okay? And we can see basically the juxtaposition. He is bigger than everyone. And when we think of this cult of Stalin, not only is it authoritarian, it's top down, but it's one in which all the masculine might, all the power was concentrated in one person, Stalin. And basically, nobody else had power. And all of the various cultic activities that revolved around Stalin had to do with the sacrifice, the literal physical sacrifice sometimes, that people would do on behalf of Stalin. Maybe you're a test pilot for the Soviet Union. You would give your leg. It would get chopped off in an accident, okay? If you're a woman, you would give your life by being a partisan in World War II. But it was all about the sacrifice of the people on behalf of this great big father figure. When we get to Putin, we're already seeing that it is different. First of all, he's not put out there as an overwhelming father figure. And we're going to see what happens with some of this masculinity. And this is one that, you know, is for his election campaign in 2012. And this says, "Together with a great Russia." Okay? We get stuff like this, to go back to the first image. Okay? This is from that 2007 photo shoot. And these images are free. You can all go download them from the Kremlin website. They're there on the archive for you to use. You don't have to pay anything. And this is something, we would never see Stalin with his shirt off. Okay? There have been a few political leaders before this who've had deliberate public campaigns in which they were shown topless. Mussolini, for example. He had a photo taken of him skiing, and it was largely to try and show that he still had some kind of power, even although if you look at it, you're like, I wouldn't have taken my shirt off, okay? The other one was Mao. Mao had a photo shoot with his shirt off of him swimming in the Yangtze River, largely for the same reason, to try and convince people that this aging man was still vital, was still virile. Now here's someone who, you know, by world leaders' standards, he's pretty buff. He works out, okay? He can swim the butterfly. I can't do that. I don't know, you know, about the rest of you. That's a very difficult stroke. Okay? The Kremlin wants the citizens of Russia to see that this sober man, this family man, is physically powerful. He's athletic. He is a black belt in Judo. And there's even a book, I didn't bring it as a visual aid, it's all in Russian, called Learning Judo with Vladimir Putin. And it has its own accompanying DVD in which he models all the cool moves so that you can learn Judo with Putin. Okay, here he is, more high class, and this is him and Dmitry Medvedev in the mountains in the south of Russia, skiing. So he's a great alpine skier, apparently. Okay, not only that, we end up with a series of what are clearly staged photo ops from the Kremlin. And this is one, don't worry, that tiger's okay. It was not killed, this was tranquilized, but it was clearly a setup. Putin happened to be with a documentary film crew in Siberia where there are endangered tigers, and lo and behold, the tiger allegedly got a little frisky, and Putin had to defend the film crew with a tranquilizer gun. This is how we end up with that. I know, it sounds awfully cheesy, but this is Putin on land. Okay? We have Putin in the air. Okay? This is him flying one of those ultralight aircraft to help the endangered cranes in Siberia learn how to migrate, help the baby cranes figure out how to migrate again. Yeah. And then we have Putin in the water. Okay? This one was the most staged of all, and this was from a scuba dive in the Aegean Sea when Putin happened to find an ancient Greek vase while he was just snorkeling, you know, scuba diving around. And it came to light very quickly after this news piece hit the international media that it was completely staged, that they had put that vase down there for him to find. So the Kremlin has gone to great efforts to define him as someone who's physically capable in so many different ways, as someone who can master all realms of the earth, the land, the sea, the air. Okay? Not only that, they went to the effort to make a, it's kind of a biopic. This is the cover from a made-for-TV movie that is called This Kiss is Off the Record. How many of you heard of this? It was not a big, it was never really brought to the US because I'll be honest, it's not a great film. But it is the behind-the-scenes story from the point of view of Lyudmila Putina, of what it's like to be married to someone who's thrust into the limelight of political power. And it was there to basically whip up a frenzy among women for Putin as the object of desire. And about the time this comes out in the mid-2000s, there are reports of women saying that they would love to have Putin as their husband. There are women saying that they're all crushed out on him. He even has a little following among gay men, apparently. Okay, and there was deliberate effort to manufacture him not like Stalin as the father of all people, but as an object of desire by the Russian voting populace. Okay, this is where I would like to try, and we'll see. I want to show you a video that kind of puts this together of a song. We'll see if my lovely assistant can help us out. I'm used to doing this with my own computer. Okay, we're here at the chorus. I'm sorry it's not high quality, but YouTube is not known for high definition. You can stop it now. Okay, we saw the chorus a few times. This was a piece of pop music, Someone Like Putin, that was initially released in 2004, but has been re-recorded, re-performed multiple times. And you could tell from the chorus, the basic story is a young woman has a boyfriend who is not good to her. He pushes her around, he beats her up, he comes home drunk, and she doesn't want him anymore. She wants someone like Putin. She wants someone full of strength, who doesn't drink, who will respect her, who will be nice. And this song actually made it onto the pop music charts in the Russian Federation in the mid-2000s. And it's very clear that the lyrics were written by a Kremlin insider. And it's possible it was even a joke. It might have been on a dare. It might have been on a challenge. But it's actual pop music that people listen to and people like. Now, you know, that's when you're like, object of affection? Well, we also have Putin is a consumable object. These are little Putin chocolates. And this is something we would never, ever, ever see in the cult of personality with Stalin. You can imagine the thousands of funny, silly, crazy things you could do with this chocolate that would mock Putin. You could cut its head off. You could consume certain parts of the body before the others if you wanted to make a statement. I don't know. You could melt it, you know? You could do all kinds of things. And at the same time that these crazy little Putin chocolates are showing up, there are other items that are very questionable in their intent. There were Putin dental flossers. Okay? Why would you need a president to sell something to clean between your teeth? Okay? We also have the Putin axe, okay? Putin memes. This is just, you know, the kind of stuff people make on the internet and they put up there. Putin memes, Putin doing everything imaginable, okay? And this is Putin rapping.
Страха у нас нет, ни у меня нет, ни у кого не должно быть. Страха у нас нет, ни у меня нет, ни у кого не должно быть. А реалии, я еще раз, я бы не стал ничего бояться. Нам когда-то обещали, страха у нас нет, ни у меня нет, ни у кого не должно быть. Но мы должны исходить из реалий, а реалии нам когда-то обещали.
As you can see, it goes on and on. And basically what's going on, this was taken from a statement. You could see RT, that's Russia Today. That's the English language, you know, made for abroad propaganda station that comes out of Russia. And someone has taken that video and cut it and pasted and created a rap song in which Putin is basically saying, oh, we're not afraid. No one should be afraid. There's no need to be afraid. We're not afraid. No one's afraid. So over and over again. And once again, you look at that. Is that supposed to be serious? Is that a form of saying, I really like Putin? I really like the fact that I feel more secure? Or is that a joke saying he looks like an idiot? You know, it's not clear. And this is something that you would have never seen with the cult of personality of Stalin. This ambiguity, this possibility to read things in two different ways. This possibility, on the one hand, to see this as an instance of fandom, or to see this as mockery, as satire. Not only that, you wouldn't have seen this kind of craftsmanship, people making Putin axes. There was a hybrid Putin tomato that was sold for a while. I mean, you know, just kind of branding Putin, turning Putin into something that's basically, you know, my product's good and going on. This is a $500 t-shirt that was for sale in the shop of top fashion designer Denis Simachov in the late 2000s. And once again, is this with the flowery garland? Is this because he's, I mean, what are we supposed to do? You know, what kind of fashion statement is this? Okay, my favorite Putin action figure. This was for sale for somewhere in the neighborhood of $100, so clearly not intended for children. Okay, not only that, okay, best Putin calendar ever. This came out in 2007 from a group of supposed co-eds at the journalism school of Moscow State University who decided to say happy birthday to Putin on the occasion of his 50th birthday by posing in scanty lingerie. On the left, we have Miss January, okay? And she basically says, everybody should have that kind of a man. And the way she's saying it goes back to the lyrics of the song, Someone Like Putin. And on the right, we have Miss February, who, and keep in mind, this was made at a time when Putin was only in his second term as president. And her question is, how about a third time? So a very deliberate double entendre. Okay, so this is something, you know, that we're pretty sure that Kremlin insiders approve this. However, I mean, this is, from our point of view at least, I think, a questionable way of expressing your approval of your president. Okay, we have another video. This is from a group called Putin's Army. And there are subtitles here that I hope you can see, so we'll see what they do.
Привет, меня зовут Диана, я студентка. Я без ума от человека, изменившего жизнь нашей страны. Он достойный политик и шикарный мужчина. Он Владимир Путин. Его обожают миллионы, ему верят. Но есть кучка людей, которые поливают его грязью. Может, потому что боятся. Может, в силу собственной слабости. Потому что им никогда не быть на его месте. Молодые, умные и красивые девушки объединились в армию Путина. Армию, которая за него порвет. Мы объявляем конкурс. Правила очень просты. Вы снимаете видео, как рвете что-то или кого-то за Путина. Выкладываете ролик в группе ВКонтакте. Та, чье видео будет самым оригинальным, станет обладательницей iPad 2. А на что ты готова от своего президента?
So, wow. So you tell me, on the basis of that, why do these young women support Putin? What aspect of his political platform attracts them? There's absolutely no political content. That is the most remarkable thing. As much as this is adulation of Putin as a desirable, you know, man, as, you know, a kind of object of erotic desire, there's absolutely no discussion of what it is that he was doing in domestic policy. And trust me, domestic policy in Russia has changed vastly in the time that he's been in office. Not only that, but the currents going on internationally, things like seizing, you know, Crimea, all of this stuff, no mention of that whatsoever. Apparently, according to these women in Putin's army, Putin's claim to fame, his political legitimacy arises from the fact that he's a cool dude. Okay, that he's an attractive man. That's about it, which is quite remarkable. We now know that this group, which posed as a sort of spontaneous group of, you know, college co-eds that were pro-Putin, were actually part of a group called Nashi, Our People, which was a youth movement sponsored by the Kremlin in the late 2000s, you know, early teens, but is no longer, you know, active. Okay, here's another, you know, another thing that Putin's army did. They went up and they washed cars, Russian-made cars only, for free to show their love of their president. However, who recognizes this image? Pussy Riot. Okay, so we're making a huge leap. I've gone from the women who seem to be Putin's sycophants to those who are protesting him. However, I believe there's an important connection here. What's happened is that Putin's masculinity, this myth of him as a strong man, as a virile man, as someone whose political potency comes from his physical person, means that basically the ideal citizen looks like those young women in Putin's army who rip their shirt open. The ideal Russian citizen is actually a woman, believe it or not, which means that the clearest and most powerful way to protest is to refuse to be that type of woman. And we can see here Pussy Riot. You've probably seen the videos. This was from their most famous protest in Moscow's largest cathedral in 2012, which got 2 of their members thrown into prison for well over a year. And these women are clearly refusing to dress and refusing to behave like those women in Putin's armies. They've covered their faces. They're not wearing stilettos. They're not showing their cleavage. So the most powerful protests that have happened and have grabbed the world stage actually come from women, despite what's going on with Navalny. I mean, we all watched this when it happened. And we also, we end up with these women being put on trial. And interestingly enough, the discussion in their trial had more to do with their inappropriate behavior as women and as mothers than it had to do with the political values they were standing up for. And across the board, even political liberals in Russia were outraged by the fact that these women behaved as they did in public, and in particularly this one, Nadezhda Tolokonnikova, who has a daughter, the fact that a woman with a daughter would do such a thing, that this was an abomination. They were more angered by these women's breach of the code of femininity than they were by their political statement. We also end up with this group, one of my favorites. Has anyone seen this group before? Semin. It's a group of women who come out of Ukraine. They have been in enough hot water. They're now based in Paris, which is a little more liberal and accepting. But they began by protesting the visits that Putin and his cronies were making to Ukraine to negotiate gas deals and pipeline deals. You can imagine that's billions and billions of dollars. And these women, they put themselves out there as objects of erotic desire, but then they basically say, screw you. And these signs say that the Ukraine is not Alina. Putin has divorced his wife, Ludmila, and it's rumored that he's with the ex-Olympic gymnast, Alina Kabayeva, has had several children with her. So they're saying the Ukraine is not Alina. We're not your girlfriend. Not only that, you can't get us to bend over so easily. I don't think I need to explain that. And we're not going to give it up to the little dwarves in the Kremlin. So these women, and in other protests, they will write basically, things on their body, as we'll see. But they were out there saying, if you want women to look traditionally feminine, we can do that. But we're going to basically tell you where you can take that idea. So let's see if I can show you this one, another video. Once again from Russia Today, but they covered it without commentary initially. This there's an annual technology show that happens in Hanover, Germany, and you probably recognized Angela Merkel. Putin showed up with Angela Merkel to have a photo op, and these feminine protesters stormed in, and what's written on their bodies in Russian, I will use a more polite version, basically says, screw you, Vladimir Putin. So it's, very in your face, and this is how they make their protest. And they continue to do it to this day, and they've gotten a lot of media attention because, as you can see, this is quite eye-catching stuff. Okay, so we have the Putin sycophants, the Putin cheerleaders in their Daisy Dukes and their stilettos, and then we have Putin protesters who manage to take this and sort of turn it on its head. Okay, we also have now the serious artists are doing other things, and you'll recognize Putin at the top and Dmitry Medvedev. This is a painting by a very serious Russian artist, Konstantin Altunin, and it's called Travesty. as in travesti, as in cross-dressing. And it was on display in a very small, very unknown gallery in Petersburg that was called the Museum of Power. And when it came to light this was on display, the police came in, seized the painting, closed the gallery down, and the artist ended up fleeing for Western Europe, asking for political asylum. Okay? So we had those images of a cross-dressed Putin at the protest, but in serious art, this is enough. In the late 2000s, going into the, the 20-teens, this is enough to get you, under fire by the Putin regime. They understand this is protest and they don't want this. Okay? This is also protest. This is one of my favorites. This appeared in the Maidan, the main square in Kiev, when they were having protests a number of years ago. And you can see that it's taking a whole bunch of different images and mashing them together to make fun of Putin. Putin is Mickey Mouse, right? Putin has a Hitler mustache made out of Olympic rings. And one of the joke names for people who dislike Putin is Putler. I don't have to tell you, Hitler, Putler. Not only that, but the drop of blood coming out of his mouth. He's a vampire. So there's a lot of protest. And keep in mind, all of this protest is something that would not happen in the Soviet Union. You would never have this kind of display. And we end up with, and we're coming full circle, back to, the clearest way to voice your disapproval is, believe it or not to do what Alexei Navalny does. And what he does is a wonderful thing. He works very, very hard. However, images like this get more people behind them. Images like this grab a ton of attention because they can be distributed on the internet, something which continues to be more or less free, to whatever extent it ever is, in the Russian Federation, unlike such things as print media and television, which are by and large controlled by the Putin regime at this point in time. So these sorts of images that circulate on the internet gather a tremendous amount of commentary, of support, of likes, whether it's on your Facebook page or your Twitter account. And then to move on, ooh, I've included these final images because the initial research I did on Putin began in the late 2000s, and we've come a long way since then. It's clear that the type of content-free masculinity that garners attention in Russia is being bandied around in other places in the world. This is a mural that you might have seen. Has anyone seen it on the internet? It appears, yes, it appears in Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, a former Soviet republic. And it popped up, I believe, I don't know, maybe about some 6 months ago. But this is basically making very clear the kind of bromance that people were talking about between President Trump and President Putin. And the only reason given that, yes, what Vladimir Putin has done in the Russian Federation has abridged democracy there. The sovereign democracy is a joke. He has introduced a bunch of retrogressive social policies. There are laws on the books which now make it illegal to talk to minors about homosexuality, that make it acceptable for husbands to beat their wives. So what's been going on, kind of this sort of masculinity somehow seems to be a cover for that. And it seems to play effectively into certain sectors of not only the Russian public, but the global public. And I'll end here with a political cartoon that kind of makes my point. You're the man. Yet you're mansky. No, you're the man. So, in other words, this myth, this creation of effective ties that allows Putin, despite the fact that many people live in poverty in Russia, despite the fact that there is less guaranteed equality and freedom in the Russian Federation today than there was in the Soviet Union, despite all of these changes, despite Russia's aggression on the global stage, that this masculinity has made him into a mythic figure that many Russians admire, that many love, and that basically transforms the Russian electorate into a group of admiring women. it's kind of, you know, I'd like to end on something kind of fun, but one of the reasons I work on this is because I think despite the fact we've laughed at these images, despite the fact we've had fun with it, it's very serious. And it actually, you know, these are the kinds of images that many people are looking at more than reading the substance. So I think it's important for us to think about not only who it is that Putin is, how he's guarded this attention, but what the implications are as we move forward in the world. So I have one more gift I want to give out, and I don't know how to do it because I didn't ask another question, but I have a 2017 Vladimir Putin calendar. So what I'm going to do, yes, and it's got, I got it in Petersburg. So it's got, you know, all these different images. You can buy, they have all different kinds of these in Russia. So Putin with the fox, whatever. So if you would like this, why don't you come up to me afterwards and tell me why you'd like it? And the person who gives me the best reason, you've got a Putin calendar. Well, I'd like to thank you all for your attention.